where Jesus is 17 through 20, he's talking about how he's come to fulfill the law, not throw it out or get rid of it, but he's there to fulfill the law and the prophets. And we went through a lot of other verses that talk about that as well. So I'm not going to go through all of that, but I do want to just kind of mention that section just a little bit before we get into verse 21 of Matthew chapter 5, because he's really setting up in those verses 17 through 20, he's setting up a lot of the things he's about to say, because Jesus is going to say some things where he's going to quote from the old law, he's going to make reference to it, and then he's going to say something that on the surface may sound extreme to some of his listeners. And it would be very easy for them to say, oh, this guy he's teaching some whole nother new religion here. But Jesus' point before that, he kind of addresses it saying, I have not come to get rid of this law that I'm referencing. I've come to fulfill it. I've come to complete it. I've come to complete it in your hearts. And that is what we're going to see constantly over and over again in this next part of the Sermon on the Mount. Is Jesus is going to start with talking about something that the old law addresses. It's usually some sort of physical thing, action. And Jesus is going to say, here's what should be in your heart about this. He's going to go kind of a step further. And remember that in verses even prior to that, he's told them about their righteousness, that it needs to be more and means to be higher, superior to the righteousness of who? Does anyone remember? Than the Pharisees, than the teachers of the law. You need to have more righteousness than them. And if you look at the cultural aspect, well, those are the most righteous people we have. Like, look at them. Look how righteous they are. They're not righteous in the eyes of God. Jesus is going to say, here's how you have righteousness of God instead of self-righteousness. And so that's going to be a lot of what we're going to see Jesus talking about, which is why I wanted to mention this before we just dove into it, because, verse 21 here in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus is going to start talking about murder, but the point is not really murder. It's sort of an entry to what he wants to talk about when it comes to the issues of the heart. So let's go ahead and get into it now before I just talk about it anyway. Someone read for us Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 through 26, please. Matthew 5, 21 through 26. Okay, thank you. So, verse 21 here, the start of this, Jesus is referencing Exodus chapter 20, verse 13. Does anyone off the top of their head know what the context is for Exodus chapter 20, verse 13? 10 Commandments. What? Jesus is not going to some obscure part of the law that no one would have known. Thou shalt not murder. That is what he is quoting here. He's making reference to the 10 Commandments. He's going to do it again too. But not all of them will be from the 10 Commandments. But this is something that is well known, well understood. Any Jew in the audience here would be like, oh yeah, you don't kill your brother. You don't commit murder. That makes sense. All right, we're on board. That's an easy thing. And even the Gentiles, though they wouldn't have had that specific old law, it was relatively understood. You don't kill people. That's something you avoid. You don't commit murder. That's not an act of righteousness. So Jesus is not disputing here that murder is, whether or not it's an act of wickedness. This is an assumed thing. This is the commonality. This is Jesus drawing them in. And you've heard it said long ago, or of those of old. He's talking about Exodus. If you go back there to Exodus 20, verse 13, That's where you see it in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not murder. That's what he's talking about. But he challenges the people now to understand that simply abstaining from murder does not in itself create righteousness that God desires of us. If I say, well, I haven't killed Jeff yet, I must be a righteous man, that is not the bar we're looking for here. That is so, remember, that bar is low. He's saying you must have a righteousness beyond that of the Pharisees, beyond the teachers of the law. He's looking for up here. He's not saying, well, just because you didn't kill anybody today, you're all right. That's not what we're looking for. And Jesus is really trying to break this notion of, I've got my checklist and I didn't do these things that I'm not supposed to do, and I did do these things I'm supposed to do. I'm fine now. And leave it at that. That is insufficient. Jesus is trying to get the people to understand this, and he goes a step farther and teaches that you need to learn to control your anger, your speech. This is the level of righteousness that you should be vying for. And the book of James talks about things like this a whole bunch. I'm not going to go to every verse in James it talks about, because I feel I've gone to the book of James a lot when talking about the Sermon on the Mount. But how often does James, or for how long does James talk about the struggle in taming the tongue, understanding how to control your anger, and understanding, when you get out of control, that is not the righteousness of God. Go back and read James if you don't remember that. I'm not going to go through all of those with you, but the book of James is a great example of these things. And Jesus continues to offer this example of how it can be applied. The first example is he says you need to be reconciled to your brother before making an offering to God. The implication here is that doing so will make the offering acceptable to God. If you go and you reconcile with your brother first, then your offering will be acceptable, which then the opposite must be true. If you do not reconcile with your brother and you just give this offering anyway, what good is that? It's no good. Yeah, that's not a trick question. It's no good. You have deliberately ignored or allowed a division to be between you and a brother. You have not attempted to reconcile it, and yet you think you're going to serve God, but you won't serve your brother? Remember, Jesus said, on what two things does all the law and the prophets hang? Love the Lord with all your heart, strength, mind, soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. If you don't do that second one, you're not doing the first. Jesus doesn't say, you got to do this one first, and then if you feel like it, love your neighbor or your brother. He says, you have to. This is included in this. This is not like, you can't divide the two. So he tells them to be reconciled. Again, it's not a checklist. You can't say, well, I gave my sacrifice, I gave my offering to God, but you still have a problem with your neighbor or your brother that you have intentionally left undone or left in a state of ruin. Go back and be reconciled to your brother. Then give your offering to God. And the second call here is to find commonality with the adversary. He talks about, when you're going to court, this idea is that you need to be amenable, subservient, not prideful. How often do we say, well, I don't want to admit I'm wrong, so I'll just have this constant tension or this battle with someone because my pride can't take another hit. There's a lot of people in the world like that. You probably know some people who are like that. It is not a good situation to be in. And we see an example of this in the church at Corinth, where the brethren were so divided, they were taking one another to court. This exact same thing that Jesus is talking about here, between you and your adversary going to court, brethren in the church were taking each other to court. This is in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 through 8, if you want to go and look at that. And in that area, in that section of verses in 1 Corinthians 6, Paul is questioning why they would not rather settle with one another, even prefer to be wrong to keep the peace, to keep the unity. Like, why are we dividing a church over things that should not matter to our spiritual, or they shouldn't interfere with our spiritual service to God? You guys are putting this before your service to God. I think this is what Jesus is talking about here. And you look at these sections of verses, this is not, again, Jesus talking about murder. He mentions murder, but he's saying you need to not just avoid killing your brother. You need to control your anger. You need to watch what you're saying to them. You need to reconcile with them. You need to be amenable. You need to be not prideful. These are hard things. This is the bar that Jesus is looking for. He's not worried about, did you or did you not kill someone today? He's saying, did you commit actual acts of righteousness today? Did you actually serve God the way he wants you to? Do you have a heart that is pure and wants to serve God and fellow man? Not, well, I didn't kill anybody today, so I must be all right. That is the difference in the bar that Jesus is putting here. And again, Jesus is not saying, well, no, that shall not murder thing should be put aside. He's saying you need to be higher than that. You need to go a step further than that. And we're going to see kind of a similar pattern as we go through many of the others of these. Any comments up through verse 26? Jeff, go ahead.
The idea of that I can hate my neighbor as long as I don't kill him, that's the civil law. That's what you're saying then, if you believe that that's righteousness, is righteousness can be achieved through the civil law, through some type of man-made law. When he says agree with your adversary, he's saying come to a mutual understanding. We have this expression sometimes, are we okay? Are we good? And what you mean by that, not just have we settled our argument, are we tired of fighting, are we going to continue on with this unresolved issue? No, are we really, deep down in our heart, are we together again? A husband and wife are said to be one. And so that suggests something much deeper. And what Jesus is saying all this is, the heart issues are the source of all of our words and all of our actions, and we need to make sure we take care of those first. And if we do that, then the continuing actions and words will be what they should be.
Yeah, you can go back to, and I know we've referenced this already in the study, but places like Matthew chapter 15, where Jesus' disciples are being criticized for not washing their hands before they're eating, and he says it's not what you put in your mouth that defiles you, it's what comes out of your mouth, because that comes from the heart. That really shows what's going on inside. And you kind of see some of this here where he talks about this in these verses. And it's going to be, again, a similar pattern as we talk about these various subjects that Jesus talks about and mentions. These things all come from the heart. If you can't fix this, whatever else you do, I mean, I may not be murdering my brother, but that doesn't make me a righteous person. I am not justified before God because I avoided doing something bad because I lack doing anything good. We kind of say, well, if I do more good than bad, then I should be all right. Again, that's a low bar. What is Jesus calling us to have? A righteousness greater than the Pharisees, greater than the teacher of the law, greater than the highest echelon of people in their society at the time. Be greater than that. Be better than them. And he'll talk about how there's hypocrisy in several places. We need to not have that hypocrisy. If we say, oh, we're righteous before God, but I'm not doing anything righteous, I'm a hypocrite. Arnold, go ahead.
Yes, I was just going to comment that when we go out and, present ourselves as righteous people and being righteous and doing righteous things, we try to number the things that we, put a number to, and also try to find out whether or not we're a little better than this other person. We're not doing as bad as they're doing, so we sort of try to judge ourselves. But Christ is letting us know that even thinking of these things is wrong. You have something against people, your brother, you still don't fix it. You come out anyway.
Yeah. Like if I have an issue with my brother, and maybe I didn't kill him today, but I'm still harboring that anger in my heart, and I'm letting it fester, there may be a moment where I mess up, and I don't control that anger, and then I do commit that murder. And then what? Well, then I've really messed up. And you're going to see that's going to come up with a lot of these topics again. If you're not controlling it here, it's going to get uncontrolled at some point, and it's going to be obvious to everybody. make sure you're guarding your heart. And that, again, Jesus is going to hit on this constantly. Jeff.
The wisdom of God is easily seen in this because we live in a very toxic culture. And we know there's a lot of, this is what the internet has given us, this ability to hate on one another. And it's amazing as we get behind a keyboard, we just become almost another person in a bad way sometimes. And so this teaches us that if we could get the heart right and be more in line with God, then there would be less rancor, less division, less anger in the day, meeting people that would be, looking for a fight and things like that. And that's the environment we've created in the world, but God wants an environment that would be more loving and more godly in the world, as well as certainly in the church and in the lives of Christians.
Absolutely. Any other comments on this section of verses before we move on? All right. Let's move on to the next section of verses. Someone read for us Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 through 30, please. 27 through 30.
You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell.
Thank you. So, verse 27 here, Jesus says, you've heard it said long ago, do not commit adultery. What is he quoting here? It's another 10 commandment. You can go back to Exodus chapter 20, verse 14, the very next verse after the one he just referenced about murder. So, again, very well known, not a surprise or some very obscure thing that the people wouldn't know about. Another one of the 10 commandments. Thou shalt not commit adultery. So here we are. And as was the case with discussing murder in the prior section of verses, he's not disputing that adultery is an act of wickedness, but again, he's going to address the sinful desire of the heart. So when I said this is going to keep coming up, here it is again. It's going to keep coming up. It's always an issue of the heart. It's constantly what Jesus is addressing here. So he's going to talk about this, saying that even an unchecked lust is akin to idolatry in the heart. And we actually have a lot of good examples and things to see about what he's talking about here in Scripture. As was the case with discussing murder, again, both of these are acts of wickedness, but he's addressing the sinful desire that is within. And again, certainly if you keep this unchecked, like your anger with your brother, eventually you might commit murder. If you keep having these desires in your heart, you are going to perpetuate these sinful acts. That is the danger of holding on to these things. We see this with, I think, one of the most obvious examples in the Old Testament is David. If you go to 2 Samuel chapter 11, when David is out on his rooftop, he should be at war. I mean, that's probably the first problem with that situation. That aside, he sees something he was not supposed to see, should not have seen, and instead of turning around and saying, well, I better get out of this situation and leave that alone, he lets it fester, he inquires, he gives in to his desire. Someone actually go back and read for us part of this, because you can see how this escalates. Someone read for us 2 Samuel chapter 11. We'll just read verses 1 through 4. Whoever gets there first. 2 Samuel chapter 11, verses 1 through 4.
It happened in the spring of the year, at the time when kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the people of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. Then it happened one evening that David arose from his bed and walked on the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful to behold. So David sent and inquired about the woman. daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite. Then David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him, and he lay with her, for she was cleansed from her impurity, and she returned to her house.
Thank you. So you can see how step by step this escalates. David's not in the right spot where he's supposed to be. He sees what he's not supposed to see. And then in verse 3, he inquires about it. He wants to know more. He's looking into it. Is this something that I can indulge in? The heart is the problem here at this point. If the heart was in check, I mean, even up to verse 3, he would have turned around. That would have been it. But what happens as a result of all of this? There's death of an innocent child. There's death of Uriah. He is murdered. There is constant strife in the house of David. More murders, more deaths. A kingdom that has its throne usurped, is in a civil war for time. We may think, this is just one small thing. This was not a small thing. This became pretty much the thing that made David's life really difficult after that. There's all sorts of death and destruction that comes from this because he didn't check his heart. Jeff, go ahead.
What David did, and of course, Nathan told him that he had caused the name of the Lord to be blasphemed among the unrighteous. But what David did was he lost his moral authority. When a person doesn't live right and he's a hypocrite, he doesn't have any right, you don't have any right to tell me what to do. You're a hypocrite. And that's a just complaint. Now, a hypocrite can repent, be forgiven, and can then no longer be a hypocrite. A lot of times people want to bring up the past that we put behind us righteously. But to be someone who is compromised just makes you a very bad parent. It's going to be impossible for you to look at another person and say, you need to change up, you need to change your conduct.
Yeah, and this was something that David, tried to keep secret, tried to keep under wraps. Everyone in the kingdom knew about this. This was not, some obscure detail. Everyone knew about what David had done. And when it comes to Absalom later coming in to usurp the throne, that may be part of the reason people are interested in this. Oh, here's someone who's not like his father, who is going to be different. How often do you hear that in politics? But he was far worse, but he wouldn't have had anywhere to stand if David hadn't done things like this.
So when Amnon raped Tamar, David was angry, but David didn't say anything about it. Why? Because David had lost his moral authority. And when Absalom revolted, his children hated him. That specific statement is not made, but you look in their actions, they had no respect for their father. And so we need to try to live godly lives all the way down to our heart and stay true and consistent with our decisions, careful with our decisions, so that we reflect the image of Jesus.
Yeah, and again, this is just one example. It's the easy one to go to. But staying in the Old Testament, if you think about what the people of Israel were doing, you go through, especially when you go through the prophets, this is really laid out very obviously for us if you go through the prophets, they were going about prostituting themselves to idols and false gods. The Israelites saw what the other nations were doing around them. They desired what that was. They had it in their hearts to follow after those ways. And what becomes of that? They start serving false images. They start doing things that God had clearly stated from the outset, don't be like them. And many times had tried to correct them, but they had that desire in their heart. They went after these idols. They abandoned serving the Lord. And we can read about what happens to them. You have death, you have destruction, you have eventually exile, and very few coming back, and it's never what it was again. That earthly physical kingdom was pretty much subjugated for the rest of its days. Arnold, you had your hand up.
Yes, I was just thinking that if Israel had the desire to continue to obey God as they went into the new land, if exactly what he's told them to get rid of all these things that were going to, make them not serve God. They did
Yeah, it's frustrating to us because it's like, well, it should be really obvious. Like, you just look at the time of the Exodus. You had the plagues, you have the dividing of the Red Sea, you have the pillar of smoke and the pillar of fire. Very powerful, just supernatural things that God is doing to bring you out of slavery into a new land. And they get to Sinai and they're like, well, we don't know where Moses is. Let's find ourselves a new God. He's just been away for a little too long. Like, really? Like, this was not that long ago that all these things just happened. And you see that again and again and again, where it's obvious that God is there. God is making his presence known. He is not a secret to the people, but they see these other things and they're like, I want that. That's the issue of the heart. It's, oh, maybe God will have some righteous things for me to do, but I really like what these Ammonites are doing over there. I want to know more about that. God said, get away from that stuff, because once you start harboring that in your heart, you eventually turn to it. So I don't think there's any difference between those two things. So, I mean, the scripture says that those are one and the same. There's actually more than just the Old Testament that says that. Because the New Testament also discusses these kinds of issues several times. You go to, if you go to Colossians chapter 3, verse 5, Paul is telling the Colossians there to put to death whatever belongs to their earthly nature. He has a list of several things that he included in there, sexual immorality and lust. And he calls all these things idolatry. These things are idolatry, including sexual immorality and lust. So if you think, well, these Israelites, they really didn't get it. What's their problem? And you're following these earthly desires, you're doing the same thing. You're doing the exact same thing. This is idolatry. Now, maybe I'm not bowing down to some carved image, but I'm bowing down to the false god of my own hubris, if you will. Like, I'm above this. Nothing can touch me. I can be righteous in my own eyes. That sounds familiar probably to a lot of people. These things are idolatry. In 1 John chapter 2, verse 16, John talks about how the, quote, lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes are of the world. They are not of the Lord. I think it's interesting that John includes both of those phrases. He's like Jesus. He's not just saying, well, you didn't commit adultery. He addresses the heart. Are you looking where you're not supposed to? Are you desiring something you're not supposed to? These are of the world. This is not righteous conduct. If you let's turn to Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians. We'll read from this a little bit. This is where Paul's giving instructions to the Thessalonians regarding avoidance of sexual immorality and lust, and instead seeking self-control and purity. Someone read for us, whoever's there, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 3 through 7, please.
It is God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality, that each of you should learn to control his own body in a way that is holy and honorable, not in passionate lust like the heathen who do not know God, and that in this matter no one should wrong his brother or take advantage of him. The Lord will punish men for all such sin, as we have already told you and warned you. For God did not call us to be impure, but to live a holy life.
Thank you. Now, it kind of goes on and keeps talking about other things that are similar, but I think that's sufficient. But I like how verse 3 starts. It is God's will that you should be sanctified. What does sanctified literally mean? Set apart. You're going to be different than the rest of the world. That's what he wanted with the Israelites. You are going to be different than the people whose land you are taking over. They're full of wickedness. They're full of idolatry. You are going to be different than that. But what did their hearts say? They said, we want to be like that. We want these idols. We want a king. We want to be like the nations around us. That put them down that path. And you see this same kind of argument made is, don't be like the heathen. Don't be like the sinful, wicked people who are going about doing these things. Be different than that. Be of God, not of the world. Be pure and live a holy life. Jeff, go ahead.
I was going to say that's exactly what the Israelites did. They decided that as long as we don't kill people or commit adultery, then we can, in our hearts, we can like things that we shouldn't like. And this is not what God says. We have to be pure in our hearts and start with that and
Because what happened when they said, well, I'm going to harbor this in my heart and just not do it? Well, they eventually did it. That was the problem. It's not like, I'm going to get really close to this fire and not get burned. And I'm going to see how close, you're eventually going to get burned. You keep getting closer. It's not going to work that way. And if you read books like, the one Amos comes to mind off the top of my head, where so many of the people of Israel had their heart was so hardened that they were fine with taking advantage of poor people who couldn't help themselves. They were fine with perverting justice in the courts. They were fine with, as long as I've got mine, I don't care if the other person next to me is crushed to death. That was the attitude, and that led to destruction. You have that attitude in your heart, you're going to show it. It's not going to stay hidden forever. Your wickedness is going to be obvious to all, which is why we go to sections like this in 1 Thessalonians 4, where Paul is saying, don't be like that in your heart. Have purity in your heart. Be a holy person. Be sanctified. Be totally separate from that. Don't be like them in this matter. And he speaks about this specifically, but this goes for just about any sort of wickedness and sin. Be different than that. So again, I'm not killing my brother, but I don't like him. One day, that you're going to show. It's a very obvious thing. Now, when we get to verses 29 and 30 here, I almost want to address this separately, but it's all in the same train of thought here. There are some people who look at this, people who are critics of Christianity to begin with, they get very incensed at these words. And they claim that, Jesus is now openly advocating for self-mutilation here, which, yes and no. Here's the thing. What is Jesus really trying to emphasize here? What is the point of saying strong words like this? What is he trying to emphasize to the people? They need to hold themselves accountable. And to what extreme do they need to go to do that? Yeah. How committed are you going to be to this? How far are you willing to go? How much are you willing to sacrifice to make sure that your life is righteous and pure? Are you really going to go all the way with it? You look at, and people are like, oh, do I need to gouge out my eye or cut off my hand in order to be righteous? If it comes to that, maybe. I hope it doesn't come to that. But think about these steps here that, the idea of doing whatever is necessary to avoid succumbing to wickedness, to temptations. A simple argument here I could make is, if you struggle with alcohol, if that's an issue, don't have it in your home. Don't go to the bar. And maybe that also means I don't go to a social function at work because there's going to be alcohol there. Maybe I lose the chance for a promotion because of that. Let that sacrifice be made. That's better than losing your soul. The soul is more important than any terrestrial thing that goes on here. And if your attitude, if your mindset isn't acquainted with that idea, Jesus is going to use this extreme here to say, hey, you need to do whatever it takes to make it to heaven. Now, if that involves having to gouge out your eyes, I really hope it doesn't. But Jesus is not mincing words here. He's being very open about the commitment he is expecting from his people. Arnold, then Jeff, the nurse. I'll get you back there. I got all hands. Go ahead, Arnold. I'll get you first.
Yes, I just want to say that in this scenario, giving you choice, because, in each of these occasions, you have two of these items, two eyes, two arms. So, if you lose one, you should get the best of it, But you got another one. Now, when you used up both of them, that's it. Then you can't do anything else. But sit there, you're not actively doing anything.
Yeah, and then in that case, it's sort of a reminder to us of that. I knew a carpenter out in California. He's deceased now, but the joke for him was it was safety third because, he'd been working with some tools and wasn't doing exactly what he was supposed to, and something slipped, and that was the end. So safety third. I forget which finger it was, but That was the funny joke they always talked about, safety third. And, you have something like that, you remember, I don't want to lose another one of my digits. Maybe let me better check, make sure this is secured properly. Safety is one of those things I harp on with a whole bunch of other things, but we avoid that because we don't want to be in that situation. But that's what it comes to. If that's your reminder, I guess. Jeff, you're next.
Romans 6, Paul says when we're baptized into Christ, we put the old man to death. So we've been crucified with Christ. So if God calls upon me to lose my earthly life, well, I've already given my life to him. And so that is a no-brainer. That's something that I'm willing to do. So all the lesser things that we're talking about, anger, calling somebody a fool, looking upon a woman so as to lust after her, those are lesser things than me losing my life. If somebody put a gun to your head and said, okay, I won't pull the trigger if you'll let me cut your hand off, you would give up your hand to save your life. That's what Jesus is saying here. Metaphorically, the answer is it just going to happen to us? Metaphorically, yes. Literally, no.
Probably not.
Well,
I can never say for sure, but probably not. I would hope not.
we are willing to lose our hands, our feet, our eyes, so that we could save our souls. He's not talking about saving our body here. We would do it to save our body, our life, our earthly life. But he's talking here about being pure, being godly. So we need to have the same attitude toward being righteous, that we're willing even to die for Christ, physically die for Christ. So all these other things we're talking about are lesser things, and we need to acknowledge that and be willing. I know it's still hard for us to face the temptation from time to time, but mentally we need to understand this and be willing to say, yes, Lord, I want to serve you completely and purely from the heart.
Yeah, and I've known many to make a complaint saying that, the laws of the government or whatever, or the culture in which we live, it makes it impossible for me to serve God the way I should. It may make it difficult, but again, we need to understand that whose responsibility is my salvation? Mine. God's done his part. He's eternally faithful. If I'm willing to serve God, I need to be the one that makes that happen. If I say, well, I can't do these things because threat of persecution. They had persecution when the church started. It was way worse than it is now here. Well, I have so many people complain, we can't have church the way we're supposed to have because XYZ thing about government or whatever going on in the neighborhood. If we have to have sacrifices and be persecuted for the sake of righteousness, then so be it. Jesus has already talked about this earlier in the Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of me, because they're following after me. Maybe I don't get invited to all the social functions of the company. Maybe I abstain from them purposely. Like Jeff was saying, that's a small thing. Maybe I have to endure pain and suffering from an oppressive government who is trying to destroy Christianity or get rid of it. So be it. We're not even, especially here in this country, we're not even close to that point. I don't like it when people start complaining about that because what are you doing about it? What would God expect you to do about it? We need to make sure we're not trying to point fingers. I had you in the back. I didn't forget. Go ahead.
Kind of a branch off of that, I feel like it's important to take note of how hard he's pushing to hold yourself accountable, because we're watching Israel play the blame game over and over and over again throughout the years.
And it becomes obvious at some point, even if it's not initially, because in the first world politics, the thing you always got to do before you do something, make sure you got someone to blame before you go in and do whatever you're about to do. But it becomes obvious to everyone what's going on at some point. And even if you think you've tricked people, guess who's not tricked? and again, these are extreme words that Jesus is using. If you need to cut off your hand or gouge out your eye, he's saying that needs to be the steps you must be willing to take. If you're not willing to make those sacrifices, if you're not willing to give your life for the name of Christ, you're not there. And that is a hard thing. I mean, a lot of people will say, yeah, I'll do that. That's no problem. And then the moment of, trial comes, and, it's like in the parable of the sower, they decide, well, no, maybe I'm not going to be part of this anymore. I'm going to kind of shrink away from this. And that happens. And it's unfortunate. It's sad. But this is the kind of righteousness that Jesus is calling for. Not serve me when it's convenient or when you like or when it's easy. You're going to have to do it all the time, and it's going to be hard, and there's going to be sacrifices made, and it's going to hurt at times. And, I mean, the example here just happens to be in the section where he's talking about idolatry, but this can go for any one of these things. Going back to, being angry with your brother. Well, maybe I need to hurt my pride a little bit. Maybe I need to be more amenable. Maybe I need to agree with my adversary a little bit more and not try to strong arm everything. Maybe I just need to be hurt a little bit. That's going to happen. Are we willing to do that? Other comments on this? I have one more example, but I'll get to it after.
Things that I was thinking, this is really what I think is leading to when they say in church, we're one body, and they have all this, if you have a toxic member who you have worked on and they're not coming around, you have to basically cut them off.
Yeah, and that's something we need to be very careful about also, because I think back to Paul and his issue with John Mark. John Mark eventually came around, as far as we know, but then we have people like Demas who, as far as we know, he went back to the world and he didn't come back. So we need to make sure we're doing everything that we can, and that's going to test our patience at times. But we need to use good and righteous judgment on that. One of the examples, because I'm running out of time, I do want to get to this. When we talk about doing as much as possible to get away from temptation, to get away from sin, I want you to think back to Genesis chapter 39. You have Potiphar, who was sold into slavery by his brothers. He's working in Potiphar's house. And Joseph, he has this issue where Potiphar's wife is trying to seduce him. Now, he says no, and he gives great reasons for why this is a bad idea. But eventually, he has to get to the point where he literally, physically has to leave and run away. Now, are we willing to get up and say, well, I don't need to be here. This is a bad situation for me. A lot of us will say, well, I'm going to try to tough this out a little bit more. Sometimes you need to get up and you need to leave. Some people say, well, that's awfully dramatic. What's wrong with this guy? If they're, again, going back to the alcohol example, if I'm at a work function and there's something tempting me there, I need to get out of that situation. There's a lot of bad stuff that goes on in those kind of things. I don't always need to be subjected to that. If I know I'm going to be tried by this, I'm going to do all I can, even if that means physically I'm going to do something that's going to be very difficult. Maybe I need to just get out of there. We need to be prepared, willing to escalate our efforts to resist temptation, even if that causes us through these setbacks. What happened to Joseph after that? He went to prison. He did everything right. He gets sent to prison because of Potiphar's, his wife's lies. That's not Joseph's fault. But he suffered because of it, but he did the right thing. That was a righteous act. And he suffered. Are we willing to suffer? The answer should be yes. We should be willing to suffer to maintain our righteousness. We're out of time. I was thinking we might get on the topic of divorce, but maybe not. We'll save that for next week. That'll be starting in verse 31 in Matthew 5. Now, beforehand, next week I'll be here. The 21st and the 28th, I am going to be gone. I recently got some time off approved. I'm heading out of town to visit my folks. So I'm going to have to find volunteers, or volunteers are going to have to find me. It's going to be one or the other, because I'll need someone to cover my class for the 21st and the 28th. So that's where we're going from here. We'll start there next week, and we'll continue on as we are able. Thank you.